Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're gonna talk about a subject that I don't think I spoke a lot on this channel. It is part of the hobby though, and this is when it is time to completely discard an orchid. Not donate it, definitely not selling it, and not keeping it either. And as rare as these instances are, they exist. So I'm gonna show you an orchid which I will discard, and I'm gonna talk about why I'm discarding it, make a little bit of a discussion about it around the topic. And I'm sure some of you are already guessing what the problem is, and this is a viral infection, which I suspect. I am not 100% sure, but we're gonna talk about it. So before we start, don't forget to give this video a like if you end up enjoying it. It really helps it out. And why not subscribe? I post multiple times a week and it's free. But if you're feeling a little extra about it, consider further supporting the channel by using the affiliate links down below, checking out some merch, becoming a member, or using the super thanks option down below my videos. Righty, with the intro out of the way, let me tell you who this orchid is. This is the Phalaenopsis ludemaniana. I purchased this orchid many years ago. I want to say 5, but to be sure, maybe I'm just gonna say 4 years ago. So a considerable amount of time. It was not a seedling, it was mature, and ever since I purchased it, it did not thrive. It did not bloom at all, and growth was seriously slow. Now, this is a polychilous type Phalaenopsis, and in my environment, polychilous types thrive. They love it since most of the times it's warm and they really don't need cool downs or anything. They're hot growers. They grow and bloom throughout the year continuously. For me, all of them, no exception. Minus the seedlings that I just purchased, but everybody who's mature blooms and grows, except this one. Now, I always kind of brushed it off and blaming environment, setbacks, something I might have done, because these are more common causes, to be honest. Me making a mistake is more common than an orchid being infected with something. But recently, I have discovered some weird circular patterns on the leaves. And these look very suspicious. They look a little bit like the Oncidium ring spot virus, which is one of the more common viruses you can find with orchids. Coupled with the lack of vigorousness and the behavior overall of this orchid, I seriously suspect a viral infection which took over. A little side note, if you want a more in-depth talk about viruses, I have some very old videos, 8-9 years ago or so. I'll link you to them down below. I was very fortunate to be contacted by a company that produces test kits. They sent me a bunch of test kits in exchange for some videos, and I learned a lot. I tested a lot of orchids. I sadly do not have the tests anymore because they're kind of hard to find, especially in my location. Hence, what I'm showing you today is just me assuming that this is a virus based on my experience and what I learned from my experience with the test kits. You can never be 100% sure if an orchid has a virus unless you test it. So take this with a major grain of salt, but by the looks of everything, I do suspect that this is a virus. Now, viruses are those types of pathogens that don't restrict themselves to certain structures like the leaves or the roots. Yes, we see these circles on the leaves, and yes, in my experience, eventually these leaves will have a shorter life. But viruses can affect the growth of an orchid, the blooms as well. Sometimes a virused orchid can have color breaks or weird patterns, unsightly patterns on their blooms. Not to mention, the most important thing of all, they're not vigorous, and slowly but surely they can actually wither away. So a virus is not just something that affects the leaves and it's unsightly. No, it's more than that. And sadly, there is no known cure at the moment other than the orchid's own ability to fight it off, its little immune system, if you will. And while it is very possible for a virus to be overcome by the orchid, it is also very possible for a virus just to affect everything, and in the end, the orchid just giving up. So for me, with this particular orchid, it's not about the circles. This is kind of the cherry on top, which makes me think, okay, we might be dealing with something serious here. It's the overall evolution in these 4 to 5 years that I've had it. It is not behaving like 100% of my other polychilous, which are thriving. Now, why do I believe I need to discard this rather than giving it away? Well, because viruses can be passed on to other orchids through vectors. A few of the vectors or ways in which viruses can be passed on are through unsanitized cutting tools, hence why we always use flames or alcohol. I use both just to be sure, in between orchids whenever we cut a leaf or root or whatever. One of the major issues is virus transmission. A little bacterial infection, it's okay, we cut it away. A little fungal spot, again, it's okay, we cut it away. Root rot, it's okay, we cut the roots and the orchid regrows roots. A virus, not the easiest thing to deal with. So first and foremost, dirty cutting tools. But this is something we can control. It's super easy to control, so that's great. And the second major vector for passing viruses are pests. Not necessarily all types of pests, but things that really graze or create big wounds, such as snails, spider mites, some viruses, not all viruses, even thrips. In the end, I actually believe most of the pests that we deal with can pass on this virus because the insect grazes on an infected orchid, gets the sap, and travels to a different orchid with that sap passing the virus. It's pretty much sap exchange. That's how you pass it on. If I have another orchid brushing against this one, nothing's gonna pass. It doesn't really work like that. We need an open, quote-unquote, wound for the sap to come out and another open wound on the other one for the sap to have contact with that sap. So keeping orchids next to each other is not really all that problematic from the point of view of viruses, although some people like to be extra safe about it, and I get it. Realistically, it's not as easy to transmit viruses as it is to transmit some bacterial or fungal infections through sharing of water and sorts. Water sharing is not necessarily a vector either because again, we need to have a broken root that is oozing stuff in that water, and then we have to have a broken root on the other orchid getting that stuff. So perfectly fine root next to perfectly fine root sharing water does not transmit a virus as far as I'm aware. So virus transmission, not as easy as you would expect, and I had quite a few virus orchids along the years. There are different types of viruses, which some I consider easier than others. Bottom line, I'm not afraid of keeping a virus orchid. However, considering that this orchid is not performing for the past 5 years, it is highly unlikely that it will just start to perform now, especially because we have these spots on the leaves. This is level up. If it's level up, it means the virus is gaining terrain, it's winning the fight. So keeping this and potentially risking my other orchids is really not a good idea for me. If this orchid would have been okay and performed okay, I would have hung on to it, put it in a cabinet, I would have given it a lot of chances. I don't like to throw orchids, but now it's losing the fight. Donating it, or worse, charging people money for this orchid, again, is very bad. It is irresponsible to risk someone else's collection just for a free orchid. It's just not worth it. I personally don't feel okay with myself just giving this away. I want to discard it. Yeah, sadly, this is why this orchid needs to go. Now, there is a chance, yes, that some orchids will overcome their viruses, and I have some examples. I have my Bellina, which was suffering from the orchid fleck virus, which in my opinion is not as bad as these guys. And in time it did manage to overcome it. Completely, I don't know, but it's gaining terrain, it's winning the fight, so I am keeping it and I'm keeping an eye on it. It is secluded in one of these shelves, the glass shelves, so that I limit pest infections as well, but I'm well aware of the risk. It is not something I advise anybody to do, keeping a virus orchid. I do want to let you know about the risks. Yes, there's always a risk you will infect other orchids with it as well. And from here on, it has to be your choice if you want to keep it or discard it. I would definitely suggest not passing it on to somebody who doesn't know about these things or who's a beginner. And even if you want to do a good deed and offer a free orchid to somebody, it's one of those cases in which it will do more harm than good, probably. Even if it doesn't infect any other plants, maybe it will succumb to the ailment and that somebody will be very sad about it. I don't know. I'm thinking of all sorts of scenarios that make me just not want to give this orchid away. And to be fair, I don't think there is any other instance in the hobby in which I would just discard an orchid. I would just give it away, which is the best thing to do if you cannot keep an orchid anymore. Discarding it is kind of a last resort, and I'm keeping this resort for virused orchids. So, if you ever wondered if I or other growers discard orchids, yes, sometimes we do, very rarely. But there is such an instance in which I believe it's completely justifiable and it is what it is. Do not look back, discard it, look for it, a new orchid that is, in the shops, put it on the wish list, let it be until you find it at a good price for you, and don't look back on the orchid you discarded it is what it is. Maintain a good hygiene in your grow room. Don't go overboard bleaching the floors all the time. You know what I'm saying? A little vacuum once in a while, maybe a little mop if you can. Cleaning the surfaces, that will keep pests to a minimum as well. Inspect your orchids from time to time. Do not follow the rule that says that orchids thrive on neglect, because neglect will lead to pest infestations and maybe passing on the viruses. Another thing you should be very aware of is that some orchids are carriers, but they don't show. They just have the virus dormant. And if you have a pest infestation that passes this virus, it can start to develop on another orchid, which is weaker, perhaps. We're not dealing with natural selection and the most vigorous orchids here. We're dealing with whatever we buy from the nursery. You don't know exactly what you're buying and how vigorous it is. So don't give the virus reason to wake up. Keep things as clean as possible and do not ignore your orchids. Give them a little bit of your time every day, just a little look over. It's really easy to notice if something is wrong, if you have a little pest, if there are circles on the leaves and so on. And that's pretty much the best we can do, prevent. Alrighty, so with that said, that is about it for our discussion. Really light discussion, but yeah, I think it's important to address this as well, because I'm sure people who hear about other people throwing orchids are thinking, oh no, it's out of bloom, so they threw it away. Well, there are instances in which it is justifiable. So let me know in a comment, were you in this position? Did you have to throw away orchids? What orchids did you throw away? This wasn't a very expensive orchid or rare or anything of the sorts. I don't have rare orchids really, but there are some expensive orchids out there. And I imagine if I would have found something like this on a really hard to find orchid, I would have been pretty sad about it. So I'm sorry if you went through that, but let me know. You can vent in the comment section. Alrighty, so with that said, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope this was useful. Hope you learned something new, and I will link you down below to the videos that I made a long time ago about viruses. Kind of cringe. I wasn't as comfortable with the camera as I am now, but I hope you can make it through because the information is good. So that said, if you want content on other plants, including aquatic plants, check out my second channel where I will start to post everything else except orchids and keep the orchids for this channel mainly. But for orchid stuff, subscribe to this channel. So that's it. I'll see you next time. Bye.